It was a warm evening in the small, dusty town of Silver Creek, where the sun was setting low, casting long shadows across the dry plains. The smell of fresh earth mixed with the musty scent of old whiskey in the air, as the local saloon came alive with its usual crowd. The clinking of glasses and the murmur of voices filled the room, with the soft sound of a piano playing in the background. This was the place where the town's ranchers, farmers, and travelers gathered to drink and gamble away the hours. At a weathered poker table sat Tom Matthews, a man well known in Silver Creek for his ranching skills and his poker-playing ability. Tom was tall, with strong arms that had spent years working on the ranch and a rugged face marked by the sun. His brown cowboy hat sat low on his forehead as he carefully shuffled the deck of cards, his fingers moving with the precision of someone who had done this many times before. Tonight, Tom was in high spirits. He'd had a good week on the ranch, and the cards had been falling in his favor all evening. His friends around the table, ranchers and traders from nearby farms, laughed and joked with him, enjoying the game as much as the conversation. The stakes were getting higher, but it didn't seem to matter to Tom. He knew he was going to win. As the game progressed, Tom's confidence grew. He was all smiles, making light-hearted comments about the cards, the weather, and even about the local townsfolk. His friends chuckled, amused by his attitude. They knew Tom liked to joke, but there was always something behind his jokes. He was proud of his reputation. He was the best poker player in Silver Creek, and he made sure everyone knew it. Across the room, sitting by the bar, a young woman was quietly nursing her drink. Her name was Ellie. She had lived in Silver Creek for most of her life, and while she was not as well known as Tom, she had been the subject of town gossip for years. Ellie was overweight, and that was all people seemed to notice about her. The whispers behind her back were endless, and most of the town's men, including Tom, had made cruel jokes at her expense. But Ellie was used to it. She had learned to ignore the whispers, to keep her head down and to focus on what mattered to her. She worked hard in her family's small shop, doing what she could to make a living, and most importantly, she kept to herself. She wasn't bothered by the comments anymore, at least that's what she told herself that evening. As Tom continued to enjoy his victory at the poker table, something changed in Ellie. She had been sitting quietly, listening to the laughter and the endless teasing from the table. But tonight was different. Tonight, something about the way Tom laughed and the way his friends encouraged him struck a nerve. It wasn't the first time Tom had made jokes about her appearance. He had done it many times before. But this time, she didn't feel like letting it slide. As she sat there, Ellie's eyes locked onto Tom. There was a fire inside her that had been building for years, and tonight it seemed to boil over. She had had enough. She wasn't going to sit by and let him make a fool of her. Not anymore. She took a deep breath, stood up from her seat, and walked toward the poker table, her boots clicking on the wooden floor with each step. Tom, noticing her approach, leaned back in his chair, giving her a lazy smile. Well, if it isn't Ellie the shopkeeper," he said, his voice thick with sarcasm. "Come to join the game? Or are you just here to watch me win?" The table erupted in laughter, but Ellie didn't flinch. She walked right up to the table and stood tall, looking directly at Tom. "I'll play," she said calmly, her voice steady. Tom raised an eyebrow, surprised by her sudden confidence. "You play poker?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, I guess the more the merrier. But be careful, Ellie, I'm pretty good at this game. Don't want you losing more than you can handle." Ellie's eyes narrowed, but she didn't back down. "I'm not here to lose," she replied, her words cutting through the laughter. She didn't care what he thought of her. This was about something much bigger than just a game. The men at the table exchanged glances, some of them smirking, others looking confused. It wasn't often that anyone dared to challenge Tom Matthews, especially not someone like Ellie. They had all heard the jokes Tom had made about her weight, her looks, the way she carried herself. She was always the easy target, but now, for reasons none of them understood, she was standing up for herself. "Well, if you're in, then you're in," Tom said, gesturing to an empty seat. He didn't take her seriously. After all, it was just a joke to him. But he didn't expect what came next. Ellie took a seat at the table, her heart racing in her chest. She had no intention of backing down now. She could feel the eyes of everyone on her, but she pushed that aside. All that mattered now was the game. The cards were shuffled again and the game resumed. As Tom dealt the cards, he made small talk, trying to keep the mood light, but Ellie wasn't interested in his jokes. She focused on the game. She had never played a serious hand of poker before, but she had learned enough to understand the rules, and more importantly, she understood the value of patience. Round after round, Tom continued to play aggressively, trying to force Ellie to fold. But Ellie didn't fold. She stayed calm, studying every card, every move. The men at the table were growing more and more surprised as the game wore on. Ellie wasn't the naive woman they thought she was. She had a quiet determination about her that made it clear she wasn't going to let this moment slip by. Finally, Tom looked at her with a grin. "You know, I'm getting bored of this, Ellie. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But I'm not going to let you win. I'm feeling lucky tonight." Ellie leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp. "What if I raise the stakes, Tom?" she asked, her voice low but confident. Tom's grin widened. "You want to raise the stakes? Fine, but what have you got to bet?" Without hesitating, Ellie looked him in the eye and said, "I'll bet my freedom." Tom stopped, the words hanging in the air. For a moment, the room was silent. The stakes had just gotten higher, and Ellie's boldness had caught everyone off guard. Tom wasn't sure if she was joking or if she was serious, but either way, he was intrigued. "Well, if you're betting that much, then I guess I'm in," he said, leaning back in his chair. His friends chuckled, thinking this was just another one of Ellie's quirks. They had no idea what she meant by her words, but they didn't care. For Tom, this was just another way to prove he was the best. But Ellie's words weren't a joke. For the first time, she had taken control of her situation. And no matter what happened next, she wasn't going to let anyone treat her like a joke again. The air in the saloon was thick with tension as Tom Matthews and Ellie sat across from each other at the poker table. The dusty smell of old wood mixed with the lingering scent of whiskey and tobacco. The low hum of conversation in the background seemed distant now, as all eyes were on the two players. The table was silent except for the occasional shuffle of cards. Tom had always been the center of attention in Silver Creek, and tonight was no different. His reputation as the best poker player in town had been earned through years of success, and he had made it clear to anyone who would listen. He didn't just win at poker, he dominated. But tonight something felt different. Ellie, the quiet woman who had always been overlooked, was playing with a focus he hadn't expected. There was no nervousness in her hands, no hesitation. She was calm, too calm for someone who had never played a serious game before. He shuffled the cards again, trying to maintain his usual confident swagger, but inside, there was a gnawing feeling he couldn't shake. He had underestimated Ellie. At first, he thought she was just another easy target, someone who would fold at the first sign of pressure. But now, as the game wore on, he realized that she wasn't just playing for fun. She was playing to win. The game had begun innocently enough. Tom had dealt the cards with a smile, laughing at his own jokes and making fun of Ellie in a light-hearted way. But Ellie had surprised him. With every hand, she played cautiously, carefully watching his every move. Tom had been used to dominating the table, making bold bets and forcing his opponents into uncomfortable positions. But Ellie never flinched. Instead, she matched him, hand for hand, move for move, showing a skill he didn't think she had. The tension in the room had grown thicker with every round. The other players at the table, mostly farmers and ranchers, watched with curiosity, sensing something important was unfolding. They had all known Ellie as the too-fat girl, the one who always kept to herself, the one who never made waves. But tonight she wasn't the same quiet woman they had seen in the corner of the saloon for years. Tonight Ellie was a force to be reckoned with. As the game continued, Tom's bravado began to slip. He could feel his confidence fading, replaced by a creeping sense of doubt. He had expected to win easily, to make a joke out of Ellie's challenge, but now it was clear that she wasn't going to back down. Every time he thought he had the upper hand, she responded with a move that made him question everything he knew about poker. It was as if she had been playing the game for years. He glanced at her, trying to read her expression. Her face was calm, her eyes focused, but there was something else in them, something that unnerved him. It was a quiet determination, a sense of purpose that he had never seen in her before. For the first time that evening, he realized that she wasn't just trying to win the game. She was trying to prove something. The pot had grown large and the stakes were higher than ever. Tom had been bluffing, as he often did, trying to trick Ellie into folding. But Ellie didn't fold. Instead, she called his bet, raising the pot even further. The other players at the table exchanged looks, surprised by her bold move. They had thought she would shy away from the pressure, but now they were starting to see her in a different light. Ellie wasn't just playing to win. She was playing to prove something to herself, to show the men at the table that she wasn't the joke they had always made her out to be. She wasn't the quiet, overweight girl who had to take their teasing in silence. She was stronger than they realized. Stronger than even Tom had realized. Tom tried to shake off the unease creeping into his chest. He had always been the one in control, the one who called the shots. But now, for the first time, he felt like he was losing control. His hands felt sweaty as he shuffled the cards again, but his mind was racing. What was going on? How had Ellie gotten so good at this game? "Come on, Tom," one of the other men at the table said with a chuckle. "You gonna let her take you down like this?" The comment was meant to be lighthearted, but it only made Tom feel worse. He had always been the one to laugh off challenges, to show his opponents that they didn't stand a chance. But now he wasn't so sure. Ellie had made it clear that this wasn't just about the game. She was playing for something bigger, something that Tom couldn't quite put his finger on. He took a deep breath and focused on the cards in front of him. The next round was crucial. He needed to win this hand. If he lost, things would get out of control. He glanced at Ellie, who was still staring at her cards, her face unreadable. There was no sign of fear in her eyes, no hint of uncertainty. She was calm, steady, and Tom realized that she wasn't bluffing. She wasn't here to play around. As the dealer, Tom laid down the cards for the next round. It was time to make his move. He looked at his hand and tried to assess his chances. A good hand, but not a great one. He could bluff his way through, but he knew that Ellie wouldn't fall for it. She had been reading him too well, responding to every play with surprising accuracy. This wasn't the game he had expected. The tension in the room was palpable now. Every player at the table was silent, waiting for the next move. Tom placed his bet, trying to project an air of confidence, but inside he was anything but certain. He watched as Ellie looked at her cards, then back at him. She raised the bet again. Tom swallowed hard. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep up the charade. Ellie was in control now, and he knew it. "All in," Ellie said, her voice steady. The words echoed in the room, and for a moment everything seemed to stop. Tom's heart skipped a beat. All in? Was she serious? Did she really think she had the upper hand? For the first time in the game, Tom felt a chill run down his spine. The quiet woman across from him, the one he had dismissed as no threat, was now challenging him in a way he hadn't expected. He could see the determination in her eyes, and for the first time, he realized how much this game meant to her. It wasn't just about the ranch or the money. It was about something deeper, something personal. Tom's mind raced. He had to decide. The game had gone beyond a simple bet. It had become a battle of pride, of ego, of everything he had built his life on. Was he going to let Ellie take it all away from him, or would he find a way to outplay her? The saloon was silent as Tom stared at the cards in front of him, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. He had never been more uncertain in his life. The room was dead silent. Every player at the table, every person in the saloon seemed to hold their breath. Tom Matthews was staring at the cards in front of him, the weight of the decision pressing down on him like a heavy stone. His mind raced, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure of his next move. Ellie had just called his bet, and the words, "all in," had hung in the air, echoing in Tom's ears. It wasn't a bluff. She wasn't joking. The woman sitting across from him, the one he'd made fun of for years, was serious. And now, she had him in a position where there was no way out. There was no room for error. Tom glanced at his hand again. It wasn't bad, a good set of cards, but nothing extraordinary. He'd been in worse situations before. He could still find a way to win, couldn't he? But then his gaze shifted to Ellie. She was sitting there, calm as ever, her hands folded neatly on the table. There was no sign of hesitation, no nervous glance at the other players. Her expression was steady, unwavering. For a moment, Tom felt a flicker of doubt. He couldn't remember the last time someone had made him feel like this, uncertain, unsure. He had always been in control, always had the upper hand. But Ellie? She was playing a different game altogether. As Tom stared at her, memories began to flood his mind. He remembered all the jokes, the teasing, the comments he and his friends had made about her over the years. Too fat, they'd said. Too quiet, they'd whispered behind her back. And yet here she was, sitting across from him, a calm look on her face, challenging him in a way he never expected. She wasn't the girl he had thought she was. She was something far more formidable. The silence in the saloon stretched on, broken only by the occasional clink of a glass being set down on the bar. Tom's friends were watching him now, their faces a mix of curiosity and amusement. They were used to him winning, to him dominating the table, but tonight was different. This wasn't just about poker anymore. This was about pride, about losing to someone he had always seen as weak. And deep down, Tom knew it wasn't just about the game. It was about everything he had ever believed about Ellie. If he lost, everything he had ever thought about her would be shattered. And maybe, just maybe, it would be a reminder that he wasn't as invincible as he had once believed. Ellie's eyes never left his. There was a quiet intensity in her gaze, as if she knew exactly what was at stake. Her calmness only added to Tom's unease. She wasn't like the other people he had faced at the table. She wasn't looking to impress anyone, to prove anything to the crowd. This wasn't about showing off or making a spectacle. For Ellie, this was personal. Tom swallowed hard. The game was no longer about the cards, it was about everything else. The years of teasing, the years of judgment, the years of thinking he could do whatever he wanted without consequence. But now Ellie was standing up to him in a way he couldn't ignore. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure he could win. Taking a deep breath, Tom pushed the pile of chips toward the center of the table, his hand shaking ever so slightly. "I'm all in," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves he could feel in his stomach. He was trying to keep his composure, trying to remind himself that this was just another hand. He had to trust his instincts, trust his years of experience. Ellie nodded once, a slight smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. It wasn't a triumphant grin, but something softer, something that made Tom feel even more uneasy. She was playing this game on her own terms, and it was working. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just a poker game, it was a moment of reckoning, for both of them. The dealer, who had been watching the exchange with interest, slowly began to reveal the final hand. The crowd around the table leaned in, and the tension in the air seemed to build with each card that was flipped over. Tom's heart pounded in his chest as the first card was laid down, an ace of spades. Then came the next, a five of hearts. Tom's hand seemed strong, but the next card, a four of diamonds, made him pause. He had nothing that could beat that combination. He looked up at Ellie, but she was still calm, still focused on the table in front of her. The dealer continued, revealing the fourth card, a queen of diamonds. Tom's stomach sank. He had no pair, no straight, no flush. There was nothing he could do. His only hope was to bluff, but Ellie wasn't the type to fall for it. She had played with such precision, such careful thought, that Tom knew he couldn't fool her now. The final card was turned over, and it was a two of spades. Tom let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. It was over. He had lost. Ellie smiled softly, a look of quiet satisfaction on her face. She had won, and it wasn't just because of luck. She had outplayed him, outsmarted him in a way he hadn't anticipated. This wasn't just a game of cards. It was a game of patience, of knowing when to push forward and when to hold back, and Ellie had known exactly what to do. The room remained silent for a moment, the weight of the outcome settling over everyone. The other players at the table exchanged looks, unsure of what to say. No one had expected this. No one had expected Ellie to win, least of all Tom. For a moment, Tom just sat there staring at the table. His hands felt cold, and the usual rush of victory he was so familiar with seemed far away. He had lost. And it wasn't just a small loss. It was a blow to his pride, to his reputation. He had been the best, and now he was sitting across from the woman he had always mocked, who had just taken everything from him. Ellie stood up slowly, her eyes never leaving Tom. "I didn't win because I wanted to prove you wrong, Tom," she said quietly. "I won because I knew you would underestimate me. I knew you would think I was an easy target, but I'm not." Tom looked up at her, a mixture of surprise and respect in his eyes. For the first time, he saw Ellie in a different light. She wasn't the girl he had thought she was. She wasn't the target of jokes, the one who could be made fun of. She was strong, smarter than he had ever given her credit for, and she had just taken everything he had worked for. He swallowed hard, and in that moment, Tom Matthews realized something he hadn't expected. He wasn't the only one who could win. And for the first time, he understood what it meant to lose. The silence that followed the final card falling on the table was suffocating. Tom Matthews sat frozen, staring at the hand in front of him, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. He had lost. Not just the game, but the pride he had carried with him for so long. The ranch, his reputation, everything he had worked so hard for was now in the hands of Ellie, the very person he had underestimated and mocked for years. The other players at the table were still. They looked between Tom and Ellie, unsure of what to do next. It wasn't just about the game anymore. Something had shifted, something more profound than a simple poker hand. There was a sense of realization in the air, one that hung like a heavy cloud over everyone present. Tom had been the big man in town, the one everyone looked up to, but now he was facing a truth he had never expected to encounter. Ellie, on the other hand, remained calm, as she had throughout the entire game. She didn't gloat, didn't make a scene. She didn't need to. Her quiet strength had already won the day. She slowly gathered the chips in front of her, the pile now much larger than it had been when the game began. She didn't look at Tom immediately. She just focused on the task at hand, stacking the chips neatly. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Tom could feel their eyes on him, but he couldn't bring himself to say anything. He had no words to explain what had just happened. He had thought he was invincible, that no one could beat him, least of all someone like Ellie. But now, as he sat there staring at his lost stack of chips, it was clear that he had misjudged everything. Finally, Ellie looked up, her eyes meeting his. There was no malice in her gaze, no sign of triumph, just calm. "You should know, Tom," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I didn't play to win the ranch. I didn't even play for the money. I played for something more." Tom swallowed hard, not sure if he wanted to hear what she was about to say. But her words seemed to pull him in, making him want to understand. He had always seen her as the easy target, the one to laugh at, the one to ignore. But now, he realized how wrong he had been. "I know I've been the subject of jokes for a long time," Ellie continued, her voice quiet but firm. "People always see me as the too fat girl, the one who doesn't fit in. But you know, it's not just about how I look, it's about who I am. I've spent so many years being judged by my appearance, by what people think of me. But tonight, I decided that it was time to show you something different." Tom's heart sank as he listened to her words. He had never truly seen Ellie, not for who she was, not for the person she had become. All he had ever seen was the woman who didn't fit the mold, the one he could make fun of without a second thought. He had never considered the pain that might lie beneath her quiet exterior, the strength it took for her to show up tonight and challenge him. But now, hearing her speak, he couldn't help but feel ashamed. "I knew you would laugh," Ellie went on, her voice becoming more assured. "I knew you would think I didn't belong at the table with you. And that's exactly why I played. Not for the ranch, not for the money, but to show you that I'm more than just a joke. I'm not here to prove anything to anyone else. I'm here to prove it to myself." The words hit Tom like a wave. He had thought he was the one in control, the one who held all the cards, literally and figuratively. But now, as Ellie spoke, he realized how wrong he had been. She wasn't playing for approval. She wasn't trying to win the respect of the others. She was playing to reclaim something that had been taken from her for years, her dignity, her voice, and her right to be seen as more than just her appearance. For the first time, Tom felt the sting of his own actions. He had made jokes about Ellie for so long, never once considering the impact they might have had. He had always seen her as the easy target, the person who couldn't fight back. But now he saw her for what she truly was: strong, determined, and brave. Ellie's words hung in the air as Tom struggled to find his voice. He had no excuse for the way he had treated her. There was no defense for the things he had said, for the jokes he had made. He had hurt her, and for what? For the sake of his own pride, his own ego. But now, as he sat there, facing the reality of his actions, he couldn't help but feel deeply remorseful. I'm sorry, Ellie," Tom finally managed to say, his voice rough with regret. "I've been a fool. I've treated you like you didn't matter, like you were nothing. But I see now that I was wrong. You're not just the too fat girl. You're much more than that. You've shown me that." Ellie nodded, but there was no hint of anger in her expression. She simply smiled, a small, knowing smile that spoke volumes. "Thank you," she said softly. "I didn't need you to apologize, Tom. I just needed you to understand." The room was still, and for a moment no one spoke. But something had changed. The laughter that had once filled the saloon had died down, replaced by a quiet understanding. The other players at the table, who had been watching in silence, now exchanged glances. They too had witnessed something important unfold, something that went beyond the game of poker. Tom sat there, his head down, reflecting on everything that had just happened. He had spent so many years building his reputation, thinking that his success in poker and ranching made him better than everyone else. He had judged Ellie based on nothing but her appearance, thinking that because she didn't fit into the mold of the ideal rancher's wife or the pretty girl in town, she didn't deserve respect. But tonight, she had taught him a valuable lesson. True strength comes from within, not from outward appearances. As Ellie gathered her winnings, Tom watched her, his heart heavy with guilt. But there was also a glimmer of admiration. He knew he had lost the game, but more importantly, he had lost the chance to see Ellie for who she truly was. And now, all he could do was try to make things right. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was a start. Ellie didn't stay for long. She didn't need to. She had already made her point. As she turned to leave the saloon, she gave Tom one last look. This time, it wasn't filled with bitterness or anger. It was simply a look of quiet strength, the kind that spoke of someone who knew their worth no matter what anyone else thought. Tom watched her walk out of the saloon, and for the first time in his life, he felt a sense of respect for someone he had once dismissed. Ellie had won more than just a poker game that night. She had won his respect, and in the process she had made him see the world in a way he never had before. The quiet hum of the saloon lingered in the air long after Ellie had left. Tom sat at the poker table, the chips in front of him no longer holding the same value. The game was over, but it felt as if something else had just begun, something far more important than any hand of cards or wager. He had lost, and that fact still weighed heavily on him. But it wasn't just about the game anymore. He had lost in ways he hadn't expected. He had lost his own pride, his sense of invincibility, and perhaps most significantly, his understanding of what truly mattered. The room was still, the low murmur of the remaining conversations now seeming distant, as if the world had moved on while Tom remained stuck in the moment. He looked around at the other players who had seen everything unfold, their expressions a mix of surprise and curiosity. No one knew what to say, but there was a shared understanding that something had changed. Tom wasn't the same person anymore. Ellie had made sure of that. For the first time in his life, Tom realized that his reputation, the pride he took in his land and his skills, meant very little in the grand scheme of things. Ellie had taught him that. She had shown him that strength wasn't about winning at any cost or tearing others down to build yourself up. It was about standing up for yourself when no one else would, about owning who you were, no matter how others saw you. Tom's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a chair scraping against the wooden floor. His old friend Billy sat down across from him. Billy was a quiet man, often the one to observe more than speak. He had been at the table throughout the game, and though he hadn't said much, he had clearly witnessed the shift that had taken place between Tom and Ellie. He studied Tom for a moment before speaking. You know, Tom, I never thought I'd see the day when you'd lose to someone like her, Billy said, his voice low and thoughtful. But I saw what happened. It wasn't just about the cards. You've got to admit she outplayed you, not just in the game, but in life. She knew what she was doing, and she knew why she was doing it. Tom sighed and ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of those words settle in. He had spent so many years seeing the world in black and white, winners and losers, the strong and the weak. But now he was starting to see the complexity of things. Ellie wasn't the weak one. She had strength that Tom had never understood until now. I've spent so much of my life thinking I had it all figured out, Tom said quietly. I've built this ranch, I've won every poker game, but I've never really thought about what it all meant. I've never seen people for who they really are. I've just looked at them and judged. Billy nodded, his face serious. We all do it sometimes, Tom, but tonight you learned something. You've got a chance to change now. Tom glanced up at his friend. There was no judgment in Billy's eyes, only understanding. Billy wasn't expecting an apology or some grand gesture. He was simply acknowledging that Tom had learned something important, something that couldn't be taught in a saloon or on a ranch. It was a lesson in humility and respect, a lesson in seeing people for who they truly were. Tom stood up slowly, his body feeling heavier than it had before. He needed to do something, but he wasn't sure what. His mind was filled with thoughts of Ellie, her quiet strength, the way she had handled the game with such poise. He could still hear her words in his mind, how she had told him she didn't need his apology. She just needed him to understand, and somehow he did. He walked out of the saloon and into the cool night air, the stars shining brightly above him. The streets were empty, the town quiet as it settled into the stillness of the evening. But in Tom's heart there was a storm brewing, a storm of realization, regret, and a quiet sense of hope. Maybe it wasn't too late for him to change. Maybe he could start seeing the world differently, seeing people for who they truly were, not just for what they appeared to be. The next morning, Tom woke early, as he always did. But today everything felt different. He went about his morning routine, but instead of focusing on the ranch, on the animals, or the endless tasks he had always put first, his mind kept drifting back to Ellie. He had to do something. He couldn't just let her walk away from that game without acknowledging the shift she had brought about in him. Without thinking twice, he saddled his horse and set out toward Ellie's shop. It wasn't far, just a short ride through the dusty streets of Silver Creek. As he rode, he thought about what he would say to her. He wasn't sure if she would even want to talk to him after everything that had happened, but he had to try. He had to let her know that he understood now, that he had learned something. When Tom arrived at the small shop, he dismounted and walked toward the front door. He could see Ellie through the window, working behind the counter, her movements steady and purposeful. The shop was quiet, the kind of place that felt warm and welcoming, a sharp contrast to the coldness Tom had carried with him for so long. He knocked softly on the door, and Ellie looked up. For a moment their eyes met, and there was a flicker of surprise in her gaze. She hadn't expected him to come. Tom stepped inside, feeling a little awkward but determined. "Ellie," he said, his voice steady but filled with sincerity. "I came here because I owe you an apology. I've spent my whole life judging people, thinking I knew everything. But last night you showed me how wrong I was. You didn't just win the game, you taught me something I've needed to learn for a long time. I can't change the past, but I want to make it right from here on out. I want to see people for who they are, not just for what they look like. I want to do better." Ellie stood there for a moment, studying him. Tom could see the hesitation in her eyes, but he also saw something else, something that told him she was listening, that she was considering his words. Finally, Ellie nodded slowly. "Thank you, Tom," she said softly. "I don't need you to change for me, but I do appreciate you trying. We all have our lessons to learn. Maybe this was yours." Tom smiled, the weight lifting off his shoulders. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He was going to keep trying to be a better person. And it had all started with a poker game, a challenge, and a woman who had the strength to change him. As he left the shop and rode back to his ranch, Tom felt lighter than he had in years. He wasn't sure what the next chapter of his life would look like, but he was ready to face it with a new perspective, a perspective that saw strength in everyone, no matter their size or how the world judged them. And that, he realized, was worth more than any hand of cards he could ever win.